our second PowerPoint, we're going to talk about personnel policies. This includes policies, procedures, and contracts. We've already written one policy, and that was our discipline policy, but for the rest of our course, we're going to be writing policies, procedures, and contracts together as part of our online assignments. And you'll be getting additional revisions and edits from me as this happens. But this is not the end-all be-all, especially if you're a professional who's going to be writing these policies and procedures for yourself, for your business. This is not the end of the line for you. You're going to have another set of eyes, and you're going to need input from additional sources for the writing and the implementation. This could be from a variety of sources, but this is just the beginning, basically the rough draft if you were going to use these in a professional setting. So today we're going to be looking at the creation and implementation of policies, procedures, and contracts. We're going to introduce and create a job contract, and we'll also have an introduction to keeping records. We will talk about this later in class when we're getting ready to assemble our director's file. We'll go over things that you need to keep on file for all your employees, but I will talk about it a bit. And this whole PowerPoint is really just to help you, give you more information and an introduction to creating policies, procedures, and contracts, or anything kind of related to policy creation when we're looking at staff supervision and evaluation. So I want to talk a bit about what these three things mean. And I got this at thebusinessdictionary.com. And this is another really good website. This last PowerPoint and this PowerPoint, I'll be linking primarily to government agencies, but in this case, this is just a business dictionary that if you didn't know what a word meant, you would enter it into it. So for example, at-will employment, if that didn't make sense to you, then you could go to this website and you could enter it, and it would give you the basis of an understanding. And sometimes if you are reading government agency policies and procedures, sometimes those words won't make sense to us as a layperson, and so this is a good resource for you to get definitions of words that you might see online. But when we're looking at a contract, it's typically a legally binding agreement between two or more competent parties. So, for example, you could enter into a child care contract between a 19-year-old who wants to enroll her 1-year-old into a program. So that might be an example of a legally binding agreement between two or more competent parties. And so in this case, it's an adult mother who wants to enroll her child in your child care center. Contracts should be written verbally, and verbal contracts are very difficult to enforce. So when we look at policies, a policy is really a principle or a rule or a guideline that an organization creates to reach its long-term goals. And then a procedure is how we express those policies in our day-to-day operations. So my example for this is an employee signs a job contract. It's a job agreement telling her when she will be at work, how much she will get paid. Then during her training, she reads, understands, asks questions, signs her employee handbook, and that includes a policy on health and sanitation. So what we want people to know about health and sanitation, we've written a policy about it, and then she learns the procedures for diaper changing. So diaper changing is part of how we express our health and sanitation policy. So when we talk about contracts and policies, I want to just compare and contrast it for a minute. A contract is really just legally enforceable, and a policy isn't. So when you enter into a job agreement or a job contract with somebody, this is something that you could take to court if they were to sue you or if you were to sue them over breach of this contract. This doesn't mean that it's free range. You can put whatever you want on it. A court isn't going to enforce anything and everything. For example, you could put on your contract that you can read that employee's work emails. You can't read their personal Gmail account, but you could read their palomar.edu. If we all worked for Palomar, then you could put that in their contract that you could read that email. So that's an example of something that you can put, but there are limits to it. An important thing with contracts is they need to be understood by all the employees, read and understood, and have the opportunity to ask questions. They need to be signed, indicating that they understand it. And then, as a supervisor, you need to enforce this contract for all of your employees equally. So if you were to only enforce it for some of your employees and not for the others, if it came down to a termination and an employee had proof of this, this could be an issue in court. So here are some elements of a contract for employment, and this comes from a man named Tom Copeland from one of his books called Policies and Procedures for the FCC Provider from 2011. And I am talking about him specifically because he has written a plethora of books about the business side of childcare, and specifically for our FCC providers who are providing a really necessary business and job for our community, so honoring that. So he has a website, but he also has his books on Amazon, and I have a Kindle version of his Policies and Procedures book. I'm not saying that you need to buy it, but if you are interested in the business side, or you need to be because of your job, or you're an FCC provider who needs some additional help, go ahead and look at him, Tom Copeland. He's a great resource. But what he kind of considers as an element of a contract would be the name of each party in the contract, or the name of the employee, and then the name of the organization that they will be entering into a contract with. And then the hours of work, 9 to 5, 9 to 3, midnight to 4 a.m., whatever it is. And then the terms of payment, minimum wage and above, and then the termination procedure. And for that, it's really that California is an at-will employment state. So that means that any parties, as part of their contract, can end this contract at any time for any reason. And then both parties need to sign to ensure that they understand it and they will implement it. So the employee will show up when she is supposed to, and she will fulfill the essential job functions, and I will pay her for it. So the process of writing policies, procedures, and contracts. And like I've said before, a lot of this is just a process of reflecting. And this will be a process of reflecting, learning, and thinking. So when we're talking about the process of reflection, it's really, what do you believe about education? So we've talked about this earlier in the course with our mission statement, and then with our description of our curriculum. What are your ideas about how children and young children learn? What are your ideas about working with children? What kinds of policies need to be in place so that children can be well taken care of? So what you're going to be doing is communicating this effectively for a variety of staff, a variety of different types of staff, support staff or teaching staff, of learning levels, and your backgrounds of staff. So it needs to be written clearly and effectively so a wide variety of people understand it and can implement it. And then you need to learn more about your duties and responsibilities as an employer. I did a whole PowerPoint that you probably just finished watching, and it's all about all of these government agencies that you kind of have to interface with in order to carry out your duties and responsibilities as an employee. So you wouldn't think typically about health and sanitation, but does that comply with OSHA? Does that comply with industrial relations? How you mix bleach, those are considered hazardous chemicals. So how you store them, how you mix them, and how they are distributed and labeled for classrooms, that's something that OSHA might have a interest in. And then once we get to writing, so you're writing policies, procedures, and contracts. We're going to get a taste, just a glimpse of that in this class. But if you were to use the beginning of these in other settings, this is a process of multiple edits and revisions before your employees see them. So this class is just the beginning. You're going to need to work further either within your organization or with other professionals in order to get them to the point where employees will see them and sign them. So I wanted to touch on something that we are not going to be writing in this class, but you might want to think about. A childcare contract or agreement, and many organizations have one. Even if you're not writing it for your organization has provided it for you. Looking at it and knowing the terms of what you are providing is prudent for you. So when we're creating a contract for childcare, it stipulates when and how children are cared for. So the hours of operation or the hours that the children can be there. So you might work 7, your center might be open 7 to 7, but if they're in part-time care, they can only be there 9 to 3. Something like that. So it stipulates how the time that the children are cared for, and then how they're cared for in a classroom setting, by fully permitted teachers, that type of stuff. An important thing is going to be how much you will be paid. It's typically by week or every other week. For some family childcare, it could be daily, and when parents pay you. Does it happen every day, every week, once a month? Also including when is it late, if there are any penalties for late payment, and at what point you would terminate the contract for non-payment. Other reasons for termination of contract could be based on the child or parent's behavior. It needs to be clear, this needs to be looked at another professional, and it needs to be understood and signed by the parents and also the owner, director, or supervisor. So this week we're going to be writing a job contract. For this week you have very few readings actually. This class, the last 2 weeks especially, you guys read 2 chapters a week. Right now there are no additional chapters, there are just a couple pages in the textbook. So you are going to be doing an online assignment and a quiz. So we are going to be writing a job contract, which is sometimes also called an agreement. So I've provided some resources on page 227 of your textbook. There's a job agreement example. And then I'm also going to post another job contract example on Canvas. These examples are provided to help you start thinking about what you would want from an employee. What would be the essential functions of their job in order to carry out the childcare that you want within your own center. So if you're a teacher right now, you are thinking about what you're doing now and what your essential job functions are. If you're a director, what do you expect from your teachers? To get credit on this assignment though, you need to use your own words and ideas, or you need to source where you got them. If it is copy and pasted from online, you will receive a 0 grade on this assignment. I can also search images for plagiarism, so if you grab an image from another site and paste it onto an upload for me, I'm going to be able to know that as well, and that also will be a 0. If you are citing something, you would use MLA for this assignment because this is an academic setting and not a professional setting. But in a professional setting, you would also source it. Typically, it's an annotation at the end of a contract. It would stipulate who wrote it, who assisted you in writing it, and then it could also be if you buy contracts, because that is an option. So if you're a professional, not a student, if you're a professional and you buy contracts online, you typically annotate where that was bought for. So this is also going to be part of your director's file, because this is a pretty important part of being a supervisor, is knowing what's on job agreements, so when you sign them, you know what you're signing. So I'm saving you work down the line, and I'm helping to give you a greater understanding of employment and policies and procedures. So this is a helpful thing to do. I'm going to provide a standard at-will employment excerpt, and you're going to use this in your job contract as part of the termination part of the contract. Next week, we're going to be discussing hiring and firing and supervision. And so we're going to have 2 assignments we're going to have 1 assignment in 2 parts next week, which will be a job description and a plan of action. So those will be 2 policies and procedures that we'll be writing next week, just so that you guys are kind of thinking about it this week ahead of time, just so I can let you know. And I want to just touch on some record keeping. In the last PowerPoint, we talked about things that need to be posted, and now we're talking about record keeping. We are going to talk about this later in the course when we are assembling our director's file, just so that you know and you can manage yourself when it comes to on-site files for all of your employees. So generally, employers keep a file for each employee, and that includes the following. So their application forms, because this has relevant information about past jobs, their CV or their resume. You're also going to need a signed job contract, and that's why we're writing one this week. Any signed policies and procedures that would be relevant for their position. So that includes health and safety, discipline, the employee handbook. All of those things need to be signed and understood by your employees. And that doesn't mean that what you sign on the first day or prior to employment, you can never add to it. I just signed a new policy and procedure with my director for my regional center special needs job because we have a different procedure for some report writing that we do for our social workers. So I needed to sign that I understood how this will be changing and how I will submit new reports. You also keep a health record. In most cases, it's tuberculosis. You keep a copy of their employment record. They should be CPR and first aid certified, and you're going to want a copy of that. Any permits or transcripts that are applicable to their job, and any staff evaluations that have been conducted at your place of employment or your workplace. And then if they are terminated, you put a note in their file the day that they were terminated, and then it's very important to have a record of the termination process and then the reasons for dismissal. You need to, even though California is an at-will employment state, people can have legal reasons that they want to keep their job, and that would be if they are part of a protected class like we talked about in the last PowerPoint, or if they felt that they were being retaliated. So having a record of the termination process and the reasons for the dismissal and the date that you terminated them is going to be really helpful later on if that was to happen. So policies, procedures, and contracts are another way for you to express your leadership. So it's part of the framework of putting your vision and your ideas of education and how children learn into a daily practice that supports the quality program that you have a vision for. So for this week, you are going to be reading just an excerpt from the textbook. So page 227 to 239 of your textbook. For your online assignment, you're going to be creating a job contract, which we've talked about extensively in this PowerPoint that you're reading right now. And then the quiz, which we talked about in the previous PowerPoint, but it's really just to help you clarify your learning about what employee rights are in the state of California. So there's a PDF, the English Worker. You're going to download it and you're going to read it. It's really important that you read it and you get a sense of what it is before you take the quiz. Then when you take the quiz, you're looking for the answers in the PDF. So this is the equivalent of having an open book test in high school. So I'm not asking you anything on the quiz that is not in that PDF. And it's really, like I said, just to ensure that you have the basis of, as a worker in the state of California, what are your rights? Because on the flip side, as an employer, what do you have to provide for your employees? And then we're going to talk about employee handbooks and manuals in our discussion. We're not going to be writing one. We're just going to be generally talking about, as a teacher, what was really helpful for you to know before your first day, what policies and procedures were clearly laid out and were important for you to know. And then as a director, what do you include to make your life easier? For me, it's the sick policy, 100%. How long can you take of a vacation? Are you going to allow people, if they accrue 3 months, can they take 3 months all at once? Sick policy, who do you call to call out sick? What do you consider a no call, no show? Those types of things are really important, and having one, and I would give people a copy to take home as well, because then you can flip through it, and if you're sick, then you know on what day you need to bring a doctor's note for me. So being really specific about a sick policy and vacation policy is really helpful for me and saves me a lot of headache and makes my life easier.